SpaceX Crew-6 mission as they return to Earth. Dragon Endeavour departed the International Space Station at 4:05 a.m. Pacific Time earlier this morning. On board Crew-6 are NASA's Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoburg, United Arab Emirates astronaut Sultan Alneyadi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Currently, they're on their way to the targeted splashdown site off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. My name is Kate Tice, Senior Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Gary Jordan.
Hey, great to be here, Kate. This is an awesome day for splashdown. So upon departing the station, Dragon underwent a sequence of departure burns. The crew had a rest period and has since kicked off preparations for reentry, including getting in their launch and reentry suits and successfully performing a leak check. The next phase of the mission is when these things really ramp up. Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Crew-6 home.
First, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the spacecraft. The trunk is currently connected to the aft or the bottom section of the Dragon capsule where the heat shield is located. So, in order to expose the heat shield and get the vehicle ready for atmospheric entry, we'll jettison that trunk.
And from there, the spacecraft will use its forward thrusters to perform a deorbit burn, which will put Dragon on a trajectory to return to Earth. This burn will last 16 minutes once it starts. The deorbit burn uses Draco thrusters on Dragon, primarily the four located on the forward bulkhead, and is executed at the apogee or the highest point of Dragon's current orbit around the Earth. This will alter Dragon's path to ultimately line it up to re-enter Earth's atmosphere.
As you can see from that graphic there on your screen, it should be pretty visible, especially if you are in Florida. So head outside and take a look up. It's an incredible sight, especially for these nighttime splashdowns. But before we go any further, let's take a minute to meet our crew.
That's right. On board, starting with our captain, is Steve Bowen, who hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts, and is married with 3 children. He holds the title of the first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Bowen is also a veteran of 3 previous NASA space flights, including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the International Space Station, delivered an integrated cargo carrier, and a Russian mini-research module. With this mission, he now has logged 227 days in space, including 65 hours and 57 minutes in 10 spacewalks. Today, he is the commander of Crew-6.
Sitting next to
Dragon SpaceX, preemptively, we are 11 minutes out from deorbit sequence start and expect to be LOS during Sept prep.
Expect to be LOS during Sept prep.
All right, those comms from SpaceX Core to Dragon Endeavour, just letting the crew know that we will have a loss of signal while we are performing the claw separation, which we mentioned that earlier is one of the steps for deorbit, but that deorbit burn coming up soon. Now, getting back to the crew on board, sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from University of California, Berkeley. During grad school, Hoburg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. Crew-6 has been Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. As pilot for Crew-6, he is responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Aboard the station, he served as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer and is coming home with 186 days in space and 11 hours, 38 minutes of time outside the hatch on 2 spacewalks.
In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be a part of Expedition 68 and 69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi, but in 2020 traded that in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This has been his first trip to space, so he also now has 186 days in orbit. Additionally, he went on 1 spacewalk, totaling 7 hours and 1 minute.
It was also the first trip to space for the second mission specialist, Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Andrey was selected as a cosmonaut back in 2012. He will monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic reentry phase of flight. While on board station, he served as a flight engineer for expeditions 68 and 69 and returns today also with 106 80 days in space. Now, to prepare for upcoming events, the Dragon spacecraft is currently doing a couple of things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system fluid loops from the radiator. This system is what will help keep the internal temperature of Dragon very temperate for Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey during the reentry phase. Dragon is also initiating separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate data, power, and fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk.
And that trunk separation, the Dragon has to orient itself such that it positions the trunk so that it doesn't have any risk of recontact with the spacecraft. Of course, we want that to also deorbit in the Earth's atmosphere, limit the orbital debris, so that will, the trunk itself will burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. It allows Dragon and exposes what are the picatiles. These are the trunk itself will burn up. Really the heat shield on Dragon. And so after that trunk separation, Dragon will reorient itself with the heat shields pointed right in the right direction to allow Dragon to go through the entry interface. We'll see a couple of things in rapid succession at that point, really at the time of the deorbit burn. That's that 16-minute burn we were discussing before, and that is a retrograde firing primarily of those forward bulkhead thrusters that slow the spacecraft down significantly, not as quite as significantly as entry, but enough to really make contact with some of the upper limits of the atmosphere and start with the drag and plasma buildup that gets the spacecraft from 17,000 miles an hour to about 350 after it passes through the atmosphere, and that's about a 7-minute period. We'll have a loss of signal at that time. It's a blackout period which we track. The plasma buildup just allows very limited comms to go through, so we'll be really just waiting for the back end of that 7-minute period until we start getting communications and data from the spacecraft.
Yeah, that heat shield will be doing so much work during that reentry phase. The external temperatures of Dragon can reach up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's part of the reason why it will be so visible streaking across the Florida sky in a little while.
Getting some views from inside the cabin now. This is fantastic. So we get these views when we pass over some of the ground stations here on Earth that provide the video straight from the Dragon capsule. So on the far left there is Andrey Fedyaev, and in the seat next to him, to his right, is the commander, Steve Bowen. To his right is the pilot, Woody Hoburg. And then on the far side of the capsule from this view that you're seeing is Emirati astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. You can see they're in their launch and re-entry suits, and they have entered that even before our coverage started and performed a successful leak check. So really, they're just waiting for these next series of events, including the claw separation, trunk separation, and the deorbit burn.
Yeah, you can just see. I love this view because you can notice the previous missions that this Dragon supported in the form of the mission patch stickers that are located there just over Andrey Fedyaev's shoulder, kind of like right above Woody's head from this particular view. This particular capsule is the Demo 2 capsule, the Crew-6 capsule, and the Axiom 1 capsule. So this capsule has been through this 3 times before. This is its fourth space flight. And I love that we are able to document those previous missions inside the capsule as a little nod to history.
Yeah, this will be the 4th splashdown of Dragon Endeavour, of course, being the capsule that carried humans for the first time to orbit in SpaceX Dragon vehicle with Bob and Doug.
We've got about 5 more minutes remaining in this preparation phase for that claw separation command. As you can see, the crew continue to monitor progress using the touchscreen above their head, as well as the tablets that they have strapped to their legs. It seems as though everyone is super calm and really just hanging out.
Really a nod to the Dragon vehicle itself. There's all of these sequences are fully autonomous. Of course, it's the role of the commander and pilot to really monitor the sequence and the dynamic phases of launch and the re-entry phases, which are really some of the most dynamic that the spacecraft will experience throughout the duration of the 6-month expedition. But they also have the help of the mission specialists. Part of their role is to look over the shoulder of the commander and pilot and look at the screens that are right in front of them, those displays providing telemetry to just be an extra set of eyes and check on some of the things, because there's a lot of data coming in, just to relay them to the commander and pilot. Everybody is watching those screens very intently.
For sure. They also go through extensive training, so even though this is the first time that they have performed this splashdown in real time for this particular crew, they have worked with our Dragon trainers here at SpaceX headquarters for months in preparation for launching this mission. And so while this is the first time they're doing it for real, they have practiced this with simulations many times before lifting off.
Sort of towards where their feet are on the far side of this particular view at the center is that side hatch. Last time we saw the side hatch open on Dragon Endeavour was right before Crew-6 launched to the International Space Station. It was some of the closeout teams in the White Room at Pad 39A that got the crew situated for launch, making sure that they were ready to go. And that side hatch has remained closed through the duration of this mission. It will be opened once again once the Dragon capsule and the crew are recovered by the recovery vessel named Megan. Once the recovery teams outfit the Dragon capsule and bring it onto the Dragon nest, it'll be the side hatch that they'll open to get the crew out.
Once again, we're standing by for claw separation. That is the first physical change that the Dragon will undergo in preparation for atmospheric reentry. That claw separation is what allows for the trunk, the cylindrical, unpressurized section of the spacecraft, to separate and thereby revealing the heat shield, which is located at the bottom of the service section or the pressurized section of the Dragon spacecraft. So collectively, with the trunk and the pressurized section, the service section there, that trunk will separate, reveal the heat shield, and that heat shield is what will be pointing first, if you will, toward planet Earth as the capsule makes its atmospheric reentry.
So again, we're targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida. The prime landing target for today is off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, on the Atlantic coast. That splashdown time is 9:17 p.m. Pacific time, 12:17 a.m. September 4th Eastern time, so just a little more than an hour from now. To give you an idea of how much ground they're going to cover, you can see on their map in the center of their screen, they are very close to the orbit of the International Space Station in the Dragon. They're over the Indian Ocean right now, just west off of Singapore, on a southeastern track heading towards the western coast of Australia. So just in the matter of an hour, they'll cover really the distance around the world, halfway. Yeah, when if you look at the track of Dragon and the International Space Station, how it orbits the Earth around a flat map, it kind of looks like a sine wave. So now they're on a southeastern track that will swing really south of Australia and then come up the Pacific. So you can see once we get into the re-entry phases, it will cross over southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, and perhaps if you're outside at just the right moment, just a couple minutes prior to that landing site, 12:17 a.m. So if you're still up at midnight watching our coverage and you're in central and northern Florida, be sure to head out, see if you can see, depending on the weather there, see if you can see the plasma trail as Crew-6 re-enters the Earth's atmosphere.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the benefits to a nighttime splashdown. You can still see it during the day, but it is certainly much more striking whenever it's, streaking through the night sky. We've actually had a few nighttime splashdowns prior to this one. So Crew-6 will definitely be a nighttime splashdown, but we also had successful splashdowns at nighttime for Crew-5, Crew-3, Crew-2, and
Dragon,
Crew-1.
SpaceX, we're back with you. Deorbit sequence start.
SpaceX Dragon put the heads back, and we see the thing.
So that deorbit sequence starts with what's called claw sep prep, claw separation preparation. So once that claw begins to separate, it's about 45 seconds for that sequence to initiate, and then the trunk separates about 45 seconds after that claw separation. So it's relatively quick. So we're still in claw sep prep.
Once again, the crew will continue to monitor progress of events using the tablets and touchscreens that they have available to them. The touchscreen directly in front of pilot Woody Hoburg and Commander Steve Bowen also allows them to monitor the state of the Dragon flight computer, as well as be able to keep tabs on any thruster burns that occur. Live view there of mission control here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. And for those that might be wondering, that, yes, is a lava lamp in the center of mission control.
Yeah, lots of activity here. Again, as a reminder, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with the claw separation. This demates the umbilical to the trunk, which has solar panels and have been collecting some of the energy from the sun and providing it to the batteries on board. Once that trunk is separated, or lies on the batteries inside, and there's plenty of margin of that power to provide power for the crew as they await for the recovery teams. But after trunk, all right, and the pyro's fired for the claw separation. Claw separation is complete. We're now preparing for trunk separation. Again, it's just a matter of seconds before we confirm that the trunk is separated.
Once again, since that claw is now separated, we're able to separate the trunk. That claw is where the umbilicals for power and telemetry were connecting between the Dragon capsule and the trunk.
The pyro's fired for that trunk separation.
Dragon SpaceX, nominal trunk jettison.
Copy, nominal trunk jettison.
All right, so yeah, we have a good trunk separation that starts about a 5-minute clock until we begin that deorbit burn. So that means telemetry is looking good. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is now exposed and ready for atmospheric reentry. The trunk served its purpose by gathering energy from the sun through the solar rays and converting that into battery power. Since we separated the trunk, we can't generate any more new power, but we don't need to since we're coming home, and Dragon has enough battery power stored already.
Up next, we have the final steps that Dragon will perform prior to reentry, the slew or maneuver to deorbit burn attitude and the deorbit burn itself. This is the last time that the forward Dracos, which are the 4 thrusters located on top of the spacecraft under the nose cone, they will ignite. The deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to the splashdown zone off the coast of Florida and will last about 16 minutes once it starts, and it looks like we're just under 3.5 minutes away from that deorbit burn initiation.
We did confirm that slewing has started. So again, Dragon positions itself sort of off to the side to jettison the trunk so it doesn't have risk of recontact with the spacecraft and successfully burns up in the atmosphere. So it slews or reorients itself to make sure that those forward bulkhead Dracos are pointed in the right direction. We want a retrograde firing to really slow us down. So retrograde meaning the Draco thrusters fire in the direction that the Dragon is traveling in. So the nose is sort of pointed forward if you were to think of it as traveling along that axis.
It's almost like the brakes, like when you're driving a car.
Essentially. And this is a long burn. This is a 16-minute burn. So once it starts, we're going to stand by and just make sure and follow along and just make sure that that has a good performance. That really sets them up to and decreases their velocity just enough so it loses some altitude and starts to make contact with the atmosphere. That slowing down, really all that does is just reduce the altitude, so it doesn't really slow it down too much. We're still hanging around 17,000 miles an hour, but it's really the atmosphere that does the bulk of the braking. It's the friction against the atmosphere and that plasma buildup. We go from 17,000 miles an hour to 350 through that process.
In just a matter of minutes.
Minutes.
So it really does make sense that this deorbit burn, the braking, the slowing down of the Dragon capsule in preparation for all of that, it makes sense that it's 16 minutes long. We're now about a minute and a half away from the initiation of that deorbit burn.
Right, again, we are in the deorbit sequence, which begins with that claw separation and trunk separation, both of which were successful. So now we're in what's called the deorbit prep. The spacecraft has slewed with the forward Dracos pointed in the right direction, and we're priming those Draco thrusters ready to fire for that 16-minute burn.
Once again, this deorbit burn will place Dragon on a precise trajectory to return to the splashdown site just off the Atlantic coast of Florida near Jacksonville. And we're less than a minute away from deorbit burn. Once again, this is the last time that those forward Dracos will be utilized. After this burn is complete, we will be able to close the nose cone, which will then basically hide or cover up that area, including the forward hatch, which of course is the hatch that the team used to ingress and egress from the International Space Station. We will be using the side hatch, which is actually outlined by that black liner kind of near the feet of the crew here in this view. That side hatch is what will be utilized for crew egress or exit from the capsule in just under an hour from now. Once again, we're targeting 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern time for splashdown.
And we are getting lucky with some of these internal cabin views as we prepare for that deorbit burn start. This will be the last time that the crew is in an orbital daytime. They're currently over the South Indian Ocean, just west off the coast of Australia. And again, their trajectory takes them south around Australia and then on a northeastern trajectory over the Pacific Ocean. The deorbit, the entry interface, the time that it actually has that plasma buildup as it's slowing down significantly through the atmosphere. That will happen, and you may be able to see it depending on where you are, depending on the weather and cloud coverage, but that track brings it over the southern Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. We do have deorbit burn start. You can see it on their displays, actually. You can see those thruster firings on the left display there. So again, that's a 16-minute burn. So a quick recap: within the last 10 minutes, Dragon jettisoned its trunk and initiated the deorbit burn. For those operations, NASA and SpaceX closely coordinate with the United States Coast Guard to establish a safety zone to ensure public safety and for the safety of those involved in the recovery operations, as well as the crew on board the returning spacecraft. Multiple notices are issued to the mariners in advance and during recovery operations, and Coast Guard patrol boats are deployed to discourage boaters from entering the splashdown zones. We want to stress to the public the need to respect this safety zone. Recovering a spacecraft from the water is a hazardous operation, and any other boats interfering increases the risk to the astronauts in the capsule, the teams working to recover them from the water, and the safety of those that come too close. For the safety of the crew and your safety, we recommend you sit back and watch, as we'll be bringing you the best possible views of our astronauts' homecoming.
The only exception to that, of course, is if you live in Central Florida and you want to look outside through the window or head out into your front or backyard, you should definitely be able to witness Dragon capsules streaking across the night sky. It'll be super bright.
Absolutely.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time that those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered the Earth's atmosphere. This deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on that final trajectory to the landing site, which, as we just said, is off the coast of Florida, near Jacksonville. Right now, as you can see on your screen, Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey continue to use their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, the Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details like the entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance remaining until deorbit burn termination. Right now, Dragon is flying itself, so all the crew has to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. Great view there of being able to see exactly what the crew can see with respect to those Draco thrusters firing. Now, with Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey ready to deorbit and splash down back on planet Earth, they'll be heading to one of 7 targeted sites supported by SpaceX and NASA. All of these sites are located off the coast of Florida, either in the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. Spreading the supported sites across multiple locations helps us maximize the return opportunities for this mission and future crews, lowering the chance that we'll have to wave off due to bad weather.
Yesterday, NASA and SpaceX jointly selected the primary splashdown location of Jacksonville, Florida. This selection process works with a lot of different variables, including the space station's orbital trajectory, what landing sites are available and have favorable weather, how much free flight capability Dragon has for the trip home, and the sleep schedule for the returning crew members.
We'll start with calculating daily return options based off of the space station's current orbit and Dragon's capabilities to maneuver and line up for reentry. The time from undock to landing at the primary site can vary from less than 6 hours to more than 39. Getting home the quickest comes with some obvious benefits, but we always want to make sure that the crew are properly rested for dynamic operations, preventing us from scheduling 20-plus hour days for them. Trajectory and ballistics experts provide the daily opportunities that would line up Dragon with the 7 landing zones and split them into what we call ascending and descending opportunities.
Dragon uses its Draco thrusters after leaving the station to execute a series of altitude-lowering maneuvers and to line up with the selected primary site. It can also change to different alternate sites while in free flight if sudden weather moves in that we need to avoid. And weather is something we're constantly looking at, making the final call to proceed about 2.5 hours before the crew undocks. For the Crew-6 return, we looked at a number of weather items. Some of the obvious ones are no rain or chance of lightning in the recovery zone, both for the safety of the crew inside the capsule and the recovery teams in the water. We're also looking for wind speeds less than 15 feet per second or about 10 miles an hour and relatively calm seas so we can safely execute recovery operations, which includes landing a helicopter on the recovery ship to fly Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey back to Florida. Once Dragon began flying free today, we had a number of additional checkpoints to either proceed towards the primary landing site, head to an alternate, or select a new zone based on real-time weather data. These checks happened all the way up until we're in the final hours before the deorbit burn, which is underway now, and is the last burn to the trip home and commits Dragon and the capsule and the crew to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
So at this point in time, we are well within the deorbit burn. There's about 10 minutes remaining in this burn. As we mentioned before, it started off as a 16-minute burn, so 6 minutes in, 10 minutes to go. This is the last time that those 4 forward Draco engines located at the top of the Dragon spacecraft will be utilized. This deorbit burn acts as a braking maneuver or slowing down for the capsule in preparation for that, for alignment for atmospheric reentry and splashdown. Before the deorbit burn, we were going about 17,500 miles per hour. So we're helping to slow the vehicle down and align it, but really it's the atmosphere and that heat shield located at the bottom of the Dragon capsule that will be doing most of that slowing down. We basically go from that orbital velocity of about 17,000 miles per hour down to about 350 miles per hour when the drogue parachutes will deploy. So there's significant slowing down in that phase of reentry, and this is really just lining the capsule up for that precise location, that precise landing at the designated location, which today is off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida.
And of course, the parachutes really do a lot of the work from that 350 miles an hour down to about the time of splashdown. The capsule is traveling an approximate 15 miles an hour. It splashes down in the Atlantic coast. And that's done through a series of parachutes. You mentioned the drogues. The drogues provide some initial deceleration as well as stabilization of the vehicle once it passes through the atmosphere. And then those are only deployed for just a few minutes before they're jettisoned, and the 4 main parachutes are deployed and inflated to really slow the vehicle down to the landing site and get us down to that 15 miles an hour.
The crew continues to look pretty calm, collected, and comfortable as they continue to monitor this deorbit burn. We've got just over 7 minutes remaining in this deorbit burn. Once again, the crew has trained and prepared for all phases of flight, including this deorbit and splashdown phase of the mission. So I often like to think that, during moments like this when there's something dynamic going on and we just see the crew chilling, it's such a testament to that preparation, that training that they do both with the NASA teams and the SpaceX teams prior to even arriving at the launch pad.
And they try to maximize the crew's comfort through the duration of Dragon's flight. When we covered undocking just what seems like just a couple of hours ago at this point, they had these launch and entry suits, and that was because they put them on during some of the more dynamic phases, and that includes the actual contact and separation from the International Space Station. But very shortly after they exited the keep-out sphere, which is only 200 meters away, they got the call that they could remove those suits, and they had the suits off for really the most of the duration of the flight. They have them back on, but you can see their visors are up. And even though this is a very dynamic phase, and this is a 16-minute burn and a very important milestone of the Dragon's return to Earth, the visors will come down and the suits will provide that extra layer of protection through atmospheric reentry. That is a very dynamic phase. Of course, there's the plasma buildup on the outside of the station and a blackout period. There's a lot of stress on the vehicle, so that just provides an extra layer of protection for the crew.
Yeah, you mentioned maximizing crew comfort, and we do that not just through operational decisions like when you can take off or doff the suit, but also the design of the suit itself, as well as the seats. So each crew member has a bespoke spacesuit. They basically the suits are specially fitted for each crew member to make sure that it is as comfortable as possible while maintaining the extraordinary high levels of safety required. But the seats as well also have length and sizing customizations in small, medium, large, basically, for the armrest, the bucket, the seat itself, and as well as the footrest. So, yeah, we definitely try to maximize the crew comfort in as many ways as we possibly can. And once again, we are in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that lines the crew up for that precise landing off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we're just under 5 minutes remaining in this burn.
Yeah, and the crew is really just watching the vehicle perform on its own at this point. They're not really executing any commands. You can see they're looking at some of the data that are coming in on their displays. On the far right display, you can see all of those thruster firings. Those are those 4 forward bulkhead Dracos, which at their position would really be right in their eye line. It would be kind of straight up. And it's a retrograde firing again. It's really slowing the spacecraft down to decrease its altitude to meet up with the upper limits of the atmosphere. We're 12 minutes into the burn, have about 4 minutes left.
As we mentioned before, after this deorbit burn is complete, we will be able to close the nose cone, which is the basically the pointy structure at the top of the capsule that has been open to allow for access to that forward hatch, as well as usage of the forward Draco thrusters. So we'll be able to close that, and that will basically make put the capsule back into its aerodynamic shape. And after we close that nose cone, we will begin atmospheric reentry. We will have about a 6 or 7 minute period of anticipated loss of signal, or LOS, as we'll hear it referred to in comms between ground and crew.
And there is some margin built into the operations. This, again, the deorbit burn is executed at the apogee of their trajectory and allows them to decrease that attitude. And it's a 16-minute burn, so that will take us to about 8:40 Pacific, so just a couple of minutes left. They have about 25 minutes until they start experiencing some drag on the atmosphere, and that allows the Dragon spacecraft to do a couple of things. It allows them to close the nose cone, as you mentioned, and also slew the Dragon once again and get into the entry interface with the Pika tiles and the heat shields pointed in the right direction to take the loads of the friction of the atmosphere.
Exactly. So if you want to think about Dragon's orientation at the moment, the forward end, or if you think of how Dragon is oriented when it's on the launch pad, it's the top end of the Dragon spacecraft is basically pointing forward along their trajectory. So those thrusters are performing a retrograde burn, which is slowing the vehicle down. So we will want to, after this burn is complete, basically rotate the capsule or slew it in order to make sure that that heat shield is then the end, the bottom end is what is actually pointing toward, in the direction of their trajectory, so that that heat shield is able to do its job, which is really utilize that friction that will be made while coursing through the Earth's atmosphere and slow that vehicle down significantly. Once again, we're going from an orbital velocity of about 17,500 miles per hour, and that atmospheric reentry, that heat shield action, will take us down to about 350 miles per hour. So we're about just over 1 minute remaining in the deorbit burn. This is the burn that essentially commits the crew to that precise landing zone just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Once again, we are targeting a splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And again, this is Mission Control here in Hawthorne. The team's here monitoring Dragon's progress and the progress of that deorbit burn. It'll be the crew operations and resource engineer, the core, that's the voice from here in Mission Control in Hawthorne, that relays the burn performance status up to the crew via Dragon to ground.
On your screen there is SpaceX core for this this operational shift. On console tonight is Jake Vendel. As Gary mentioned, this is the primary communicator for from SpaceX Mission Control to the crew. Very similar to NASA's Capcom role.
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete and nominal. Nose cone closure initiated.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
All right, good news there coming from SpaceX core, Jake Vendel, letting us know that the deorbit burn completed and everything went nominal or as expected. So that's all really good news.
Very good. We are in the deorbit sequence now. So that you just heard the nose cone is about to close, and I can see it's actually closing now. In the background, the Dragon is currently inhibiting those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete the deorbit burn, ensuring it's safe to latch the nose cone and shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox suit purge. purge. So this will help Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey cool and comfortable during re-entry, which is coming up here in about 20 minutes. At this point, the nose cone is closing again and protecting the forward hatch for re-entry. Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey are using their screens to monitor the locking of the nose cone, which is done by a set of hooks.
So we're about 2 minutes until the nose cone is completely closed and locked in. Once again, we are in the deorbit sequence. So far, we have separated the trunk and we have completed the deorbit burn. And right now we are closing the nose cone. This is the final physical change or modification to the Dragon capsule prior to re-entry. After the nose cone is closed, we will slew or reorient Dragon to basically make sure that the heat shield is what is pointing first toward planet Earth, and that will line us up for atmospheric re-entry.
And a lot of that is in work now in concurrence. The closing of the nose cone is underway, as well as the slewing. Again, there's plenty of margin here from the time that the deorbit burn is complete, that 16-minute burn, and the time of entry interface. Make sure there's, if they have time to correct anything, that is already built in, but everything's looking good so far. Making sure the heat shields are pointed the right way, nose cone is closed, and the crew is prepped with that nitrogen purge. So we saw the views of the crew from the inside of the capsule with their visors up. Again, those visors will come down, and part of the, not only do the suits actually provide that extra protection, but Kate, you mentioned that they'll actually make sure that they provide cooling and comfort, because there's a lot of heat that's being generated through the re-entry process. The outside of the vehicle can experience upwards of 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll purge some cool air through the suits. But the interior of the capsule, there's also a thermal system that will help pump some cool air there as well. So the crew generally stays really comfortable, even though the exterior of the capsule does get super hot, as you said. With that plasma buildup, it'll be certainly one of the more dynamic things that the spacecraft goes through during its mission. But yeah, the crew stays pretty comfortable, and that nitrox air, which is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, the same stuff that is put into scuba tanks for scuba divers, that same breathing air, we pump that through the suits to allow the crew to stay super comfy during their re-entry.
We did get confirmation that the nose cone is closed. So this deorbit sequence we're really making our way through very well.
As we begin the second half of entry, Dragon is now beginning to inject that cool nitrox air that I mentioned before, that's being delivered to the suits worn by Stephen, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey. Again, this is what will allow the crew to remain comfortable while the external temperatures of Dragon reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat shield will be pointing forward, leading the capsule to the landing site. Now, speaking of that heat shield, Dragon's primary heat shield is comprised of Pica 3.0, Pica meaning phenolic impregnated carbon ablator. The first generation Pica was initially developed by NASA for studying and sampling comets within our solar system.
Yeah, really cool history here. SpaceX partnered with NASA to develop Pica X, which was the second generation product used on all Dragon 1 cargo resupply missions that successfully resupplied the space station on 20 different missions. Pica 3.0 was developed specifically for use on the Dragon 2 crew and cargo, with enhanced structural and thermal properties that optimized the heat shield and drove down cost and mass.
Yeah, pretty cool. The remainder of Dragon capsule is comprised primarily of SpaceX proprietary ablative material. It's another class of thermal protection, which is lighter weight versus Pica and protects the underlying composite structure during re-entry to basically ensure that the structural capabilities are maintained from mission to mission.
And while Dragon will experience temperatures well over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, Kate, you mentioned 3,500 degrees, during peak re-entry conditions, the characteristics of the TPS, the thermal protection system, coupled with the ECLSS, environmental control and life support system in the pressurized interior, will ensure that Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey stay cool and comfortable during all phases of re-entry through splashdown.
After Dragon Endeavour has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, a series of parachutes will deploy to slow the crew's descent. As we mentioned before, the first set will be the 2 drogue parachutes, followed by the 4 main chutes, and those will guide Dragon to its first contact with Earth since launching in April earlier this year. Dragon will automatically deploy these parachutes when different pressure and positioning sensors on the capsule detect that they are at the right speed and altitude.
Vehicle velocity at drogue deploys approximately 300 miles per hour. They deploy at about 18,000 feet. Then vehicle velocity at main parachute deploy is approximately 119 miles an hour. They deploy at about 6,500 feet. Vehicle velocity at water splashdown is about 16 miles an hour. Highest G load the crew will experience during reentry is approximately 3.5 Gs. So again, the nose cone is closed. Those nose cones are secured by a series of latches. The first set of hooks is closed, and the second set of hooks is traveling to secure the nose cone. Again, that is closed, and the vehicle is slewing or orienting itself with the deorbit position, with the entry interface position, to allow the heat shield to meet up with the atmosphere. And those Pika tiles that were designed to take those loads of the heat will be pointing the right direction.
One correction, I did mention Crew-6 launched in April. It actually launched in March of this year.
Right. March 2nd Eastern Time, I think March 1st Pacific Time. It's 8:47 p.m. Pacific Time now. We're about 30 minutes from the expected splashdown time. Again, we're tracking 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time over in Florida near Jacksonville, which is our primary landing site here at the Pacific Coast, 9:17 p.m.
Dragon, SpaceX, nose cone secured for entry.
SpaceX, Dragon's office.
So again, 2 sets of latches that secure that nose cone. Those have traveled and confirmed that not only is the nose cone closed, but it is secured for re-entry.
And with that, Dragon, I've got a entry sequence brief. Report ready to copy.
SpaceX, Dragon, we are ready to copy.
All right, Steve. We see blackout start at 0404, blackout end at 0411, and splashdown at 0417. No update to vehicle status. Weather still looks good. How copy?
0404, 0411, and 0417. Weather still looks good. And I think that copies it all. Thank you.
Good readback. One more note, we noticed prior to the burn, a few of the tablets were not secure to the satchels. I'm hoping that you can positively verify that each tablet is indeed secure.
We're working on that right now, and we'll get it by 1:50.
Copy.
All right, that was SpaceX Core Jake Vendel letting Commander Steve Bowen know our updated timeline for that expected loss of signal. We heard them read out 0404 to 0411, those times being, the space standard, the GMT time zone. So for us, we would expect that to be at 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 12:04 p.m. Eastern, and lasting until the 11-minute mark there. So just slightly, actually no, right on time, we did say about a 6 or 7 minute loss of signal. Splashdown time remains as we originally were targeting that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern.
And you can just see just how quick in succession everything is. From 9:04 to 9:11, we go from 17,000 miles an hour to 350 miles an hour, and then through the drogue parachute deployment and main parachute deployment over the course of 6 minutes, we get down to 15 miles an hour at the time of splashdown.
Yeah, and during that time, the crew will experience about 3 to 5 Gs during this reentry phase. So pretty similar to what they would have felt during the launch phase of the mission.
We're focusing on the flight control teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne through the duration of today's operations. If you've been following along for our coverage, we've been joined with the flight control teams over in Houston, Texas. Of course, they are monitoring very closely, but that was really for joint operations. It's a different set of flight criteria and flight rules when the two flight control rooms are working in tandem, operating by the same flight criteria. And there is that dance of the Dragon and the International Space Station. Really, the responsibility of the Dragon is on the teams here in SpaceX. They are, of course, communicating constantly with the teams over at NASA, and the NASA teams are in the loop monitoring the progression of the Crew-6 astronauts and cosmonauts' return home to Earth.
So we've mentioned before that our anticipated loss of signal is coming up at 9:04 p.m. and will last about 7 minutes until 9:11 p.m. Pacific time. This occurs on all of our Dragon reentry missions. It is pretty standard and expected, the 7-minute period where the Dragon is unable to send any telemetry to the ground or be commanded from the ground, including no communications, which is why we call it a communications blackout. So the reason for that being, as we've said a couple of times, the heat shield located at the bottom of the capsule will be doing a ton of work as it encounters that friction from the atmosphere as it re-enters. This is a good thing. It's helping to slow the vehicle down from 17,000 miles per hour to about 350 miles per hour. Now, as a result of all that work being done by the heat shield and the friction, this plasma forms on the exterior of the capsule, and that's why we have these thermal protection systems, or TPS, all around Dragon to help protect it during these phases where that plasma builds up and gets really hot. It'll reach about 3,500 degrees or thereabout during this reentry phase. So pretty standard. That being said, it does make for a great view. If you live in Central Florida, you will definitely be able to see Dragon streaking across the night sky. Really, if you look up, you won't be able to miss it.
Now, of course, once Dragon splashes down, and we did get that read very recently up to the crew that we're right on target for that 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville. The recovery teams are already staged. We got word that the recovery vessel named Megan is out there. That'll be the one that actually lifts the Dragon capsule up from the water. There's also fast boats and jet skis and whole teams really ready to go to support the recovery operation. We've supported many nighttime landings or splashdowns in the past, and so they're very used to these operations. Dragon has systems built into the outside of the capsule that allow for flashing lights and a lot of calling of attention to itself to make sure that the recovery teams can easily see it. And of course, the assets themselves have equipment on board to be able to locate, track, and find, and of course, recover the Dragon capsule. And so those teams will go out. They'll perform a sniff. That's actually the first thing that'll happen, is the fast boats will circle the vehicle and just make sure that the Dragon capsule itself is safe to approach. There's dedicated teams that go out and make sure there's no leaking of nitrogen tetroxide or any hazardous materials before the rest of the teams move in. There's a lot of team members that are out there now to support the operation.
Yeah, this evening for this Atlantic Coast recovery, we are utilizing our recovery vessel Megan, and those teams are stationed about 3 miles away from the targeted splashdown site. So it's one of my favorite but frustrating parts of splashdown is after we see the capsule actually land in the water and we see the parachutes be released and splash down as well, we then have to wait for the recovery vessel to trudge those 3 miles, and in that time we're able to see the fast boats approach the the capsule, as the name suggests, much faster. They are slower than Megan, the primary recovery vessel. So they can get out there much quicker and perform, as you said, that sniff test as well as recover the parachutes from the water.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of improvements just because, we're talking about Crew-6 right now. So this is not just a 6th mission. We've also done this with the demonstration mission with Bob and Doug, Demo 2. And so this will really be the 7th time that we've done it for a crew operation. And so the recovery teams have become much more efficient and had lessons learned along the way. So the recovery operations we've seen just get a lot faster overall.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've done nighttime splashdown operations for Crew 1, Crew 2, Crew 3, Crew 5, as well as Axiom 2, just a couple months ago. So yeah, the recovery teams at this point have actually had more nighttime splashdowns than they have daytime. I should say for crew missions.
That's right.
Not for NASA crew, but for crewed missions, I'm not counting the cargo missions.
Right. And it is a good nod to make sure that we mention the private missions as well. We mentioned the Axiom mission 1 and 2, of course, Inspiration 4. So there's a lot of practice with the recovery operations in these teams. Of course, we have the views here of the flight operations teams here in Hawthorne that are monitoring the Dragon's re-entry. Again, we've successfully performed a deorbit burn, so we're just waiting for that entry interface that's coming up at 9:04. So really just 7 minutes from now, and that is the beginning of the blackout period. That's when the Dragon capsule starts to experience the molecules of the atmosphere a lot closer, so that it experiences much more friction, and we start to see that plasma build up, and it provides a significant amount of drag and shaves a lot of velocity off of the Dragon capsule right now, traveling about 17,000 miles an hour. And through the 7-minute period of blackout, where there is that plasma buildup, where we are traveling through the more denser parts of the atmosphere and slowing down significantly, we'll get on the back end of that. 9/11, they said, was the exit of that blackout period, where we start getting communications from the crew, and we're on the back end of the entry interface. That will be, we'll get down to 350 miles an hour.
Yeah, if memory serves me correctly, we typically hear SpaceX Core start reaching out to the crew about 1 minute early. There have been some instances where we've been able to regain communications with the crew a little bit earlier than originally anticipated. So probably around the 9:10 p.m. Minute mark, Pacific, I should say, we might start hearing SpaceX Core hail the Crew-6.
And it could go in the other direction too. This is, of course, an estimate based on the predicted plasma buildup and the predicted comms blackout. But of course, there could be another minute or so before they regain comms, and that's all built into the timeline. We'll hear those checks go up on Dragon to ground, and they'll continuously call the crew.
SpaceX Dragon, tablets are secure, restraints are tightened, visors are down.
Copy, Dragon, tablet secure, restraints tightened, and visors down. With that, we are 5 minutes until the predicted comm blackout. Dragon Endeavour, see you on the other side at 0411.
0411, we'll talk to you then.
All right, that was the voice of Crew-6 Commander Steve Bowen, letting us know that the teams have put away and secured the tablets that were prior to now. They were located and strapped onto their legs outside of the spacesuit. So those are now put away, and they have also closed the visors. So the last time we saw the crew inside the capsule, their visors were up. They've now closed the visors, and that provides really a leak-tight environment for the crew during this dynamic phase of reentry. For those of you that have recently joined over the last 45 minutes, we've basically been executing step-by-step the deorbit sequence, starting with the releasing of the claw, which is what was connecting the Dragon capsule to the trunk being the unpressurized section that is jettisoned in order to reveal the heat shield located at the bottom of the Dragon spacecraft. So we released the claw, that the trunk separated. We then performed a 16-minute long deorbit burn. We've also slewed or reoriented the capsule so that the heat shield is facing it's hard to describe it in my head, but it basically, the heat shield is what is leading the capsule to the targeted splashdown site, which today is in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. As we just heard, we have an anticipated loss of signal, or LOS, that will last for 7 minutes, and it will start at 9:04 p.m. Pacific in about 3 minutes from now. That is standard for all of our Crew Dragon reentry missions, and at that point in time, the Dragon will not be able to send any telemetry or data to the ground. The ground will not be able to command Dragon at all, and we will not be able to receive any communications from the crew or to them either.
Now, on the back end of the communications blackout, when we receive a word from the crew, it'll be the crew themselves that read out some of the calls of their status, and we'll be relying on that. And of course, the data that we're receiving from Dragon, now that we're outside of that blackout, to determine the performance of the vehicle. We'll see those drogues. There's 4 main parachutes that allow for a safe landing. The parachutes are designed with that 4th in mind, so that even if the 4th were not to inflate all the way, 3 could actually provide enough resistance to properly decelerate the Dragon so that it lands right on time and provides a normal amount of drag on the vehicle to get us down to that 15 miles an hour at the expected time. The views we're seeing now are, of course, of the flight operations team here in Mission Control in Hawthorne. We'll soon hopefully be getting some views from the recovery vessels out in the Atlantic Ocean. That's the recovery vessel Megan, as well as the recovery teams on fast boats and jet skis. We should be getting views, hopefully, from the Atlantic Ocean to see the Crew-6's entry through the atmosphere.
I was trying to look through my notes. I can't quite remember what it is off the top of my head, but you were talking about the parachutes before, and the drogue chutes that we deploy prior to the main parachutes. Those drogue chutes help provide additional slowing and stability for the Dragon capsule as it comes out of that atmospheric reentry. And I forget what factor it is that if we didn't have the drogue parachutes, I think it's something like the main parachutes would have to be manufactured to be 2 to 3 times stronger, which of course would add weight to the capsule itself. And in spaceflight, everything is weight. You want to minimize the weight that you're taking. So those drogue chutes are definitely small but mighty in the job that they have to do. Now we're under a minute away from that, or just a couple seconds rather, away from that anticipated loss of signal, or LOS. This will be a 7-minute period in which we are unable to communicate with the crew, and we are unable to command Dragon or receive telemetry or data from it.
Okay, we're in that loss of signal. The clock starts now, right on time, 9:04 p.m. Pacific, 12:04 a.m. Eastern. That starts the 7-minute clock of the anticipated communications blackout. Kate, as you mentioned, the teams here in Mission Control in Hawthorne may start reaching out to the crew a little early. The crew themselves may see an acquisition of signal from their own data and call out to the teams to let them know that they're outside of the blackout. It could be intermittent too, so there's a lot of different factors, but the key here is communication, and they'll continue to talk to make sure that they are relaying they, meaning the crew, are relaying the information to the teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne, and of course the Hawthorne will be able to respond.
Right. So for those of you that have just recently joined us, at this point we have entered a communications blackout period, a loss of signal, or LOS, and lasts approximately 7 minutes due to plasma formation around the spacecraft. During this time, no vehicle telemetry is received by Mission Control, which you see there on your screen, and no external commanding of the vehicle or voice communication is possible. But as a reminder, Dragon is designed to fly itself, during this reentry, the vehicle will be slowing down from orbital velocity, which is about 17,000 miles per hour. And the top temperature that Dragon will experience upon reentry is about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. As we've mentioned before, this expected blackout period is, we anticipate it to last about 7 minutes. It might be a little bit less, it might be a little bit more, but we will definitely be able to hear the crew once they do re-enter from that anticipated loss of signal. We'll have acquisition of signal, which is AOS.
That's right. And the last read up to the crew prior to their entry and the beginning of the blackout period, we were still tracking an on-time splashdown. Again, for those following along, that's 12:17 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:17 p.m. Pacific Time.
We are now within the atmospheric entry phase of the return for the Crew-6 crew. Once again, the plasma buildup on the exterior of the capsule results in our inability to command or communicate with the Dragon capsule during this time. This happens with all of our crew missions, and we expect this to end at about 9:11 p.m. Pacific or 12:11 a.m. Eastern. Live view there of SpaceX Mission Control located just behind Gary and myself. They are continuing to monitor the length of the acquisition of, the length of this blackout period. And we will be able to hear SpaceX Core, who for this evening shift is Jake Vendel. We'll probably start to hear him hail the crew around 9:11 or 9:10 p.m. Pacific.
So if you're following along of our coverage and you are in southern Mexico or the Yucatan Peninsula, there is a chance, depending on the weather that you have down there, that you would have been able to see the beginning of the entry interface. We're now about 4 minutes in of a 7-minute blackout period.
This is a great graphic indicating the trajectory. This is an ascending trajectory that Dragon is taking. So as Gary just said, over the Gulf of Mexico, across the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. So if you're tuning in from Central Florida, head outside right now, look up, because this looks like our first live view from the WB-57.
That's right. This is a high altitude aircraft that has thermal imaging, so we're able to get some of those views of the Dragon vehicle in the middle of its entry interface. Again, we're about 4 minutes in. We have a tally-ho on the vehicle from the WB-57. And actually maybe about 5 minutes in at this point. So maybe a little bit more than 2 minutes. Again, there's some variation in the predicted 7-minute time period. It's not exact. We might hear a little early, a little later.
So as we were saying, if you're in Central Florida, head outside right now. You should be able to see this glowing streak cross over as we are targeting. There's that streak I was just mentioning. That's a live view, not thermal. This is heading towards the Atlantic coast of near Jacksonville, Florida. So a beautiful view, very such a striking visual that we have for these nighttime splashdowns.
Recovery teams are in position off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. And we are still targeting our expected splashdown time of 9:17 p.m. Pacific, 12:17 a.m. Eastern. We only have about a minute and some change of this blackout period anticipated. And again, there's some variation on when we can hear from the crew.
So what you're seeing on your...
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
So at this point, we're going to hear SpaceX Core begin to hail. As Gary said, this blackout period is estimated. So we're now beginning to reach out to the crew to see if we've regained that communications capability.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
What you're seeing on your screen now is a live view of the thermal cam on the WB-57.
And we hear Crew-6 from inside the cabin on the back end of the blackout.
Copy, Dragon. We see a healthy flight computer. Expect automated chute deployment.
Dragon copies.
There's our live view of the crew, our first view of them on the other side of that communications blackout. At this point in time, they are re-entering through the Earth's atmosphere over the coast of Florida, heading towards Jacksonville, Atlantic coast. Up next will be the deployment of the drogue parachutes, which should happen in about 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes.
You can see they got through some of the thicker parts of the atmosphere, and that plasma buildup is starting to dissipate. We have about, less than 2 minutes or so.
Dragon, SpaceX, GPS converged. Expect nominal altitude for drogue chute deploy.
SpaceX Dragon copies. Receive fail.
All right, so that call out just letting the crew know that they can expect to have the initial parachute deployment. That is the drogue parachutes, and that those typically deploy about 18,000 feet. At that point in time, the capsule is going around 350 miles per hour.
Some of the data and telemetry from Dragon is in meters, so if you do hear those calls from the crew and from us, some of the telemetry we're seeing is in the metric system. Confirmation that seat rotation is in progress. This allows the crew to be in the proper position to take the loads of the chutes as they experience the G-forces that the chutes exhibit upon deployment. They provide some drag on the vehicle. And again, we're traveling about 350 miles an hour. So from here, with the drogue deployments and main deployment, we're going to get down to about 15 miles an hour. Drogue deployment coming up in approximately
Dragon,
20 seconds.
Brace for drogue window.
And we're roughly 30 seconds away from that drogue deployment. SpaceX Core just telling the crew to prepare for the deployment of those drogue parachutes. At this point in time, they are around, or when the drogues are deployed, they're traveling around 350 miles per hour. At the time that the main parachutes are deployed, just seconds later, they'll be going around 120 miles per hour. So these drogue parachutes help provide further deceleration as well as stability for the capsule prior to those main parachute deployments.
Drogue pyros have fired, and we have good confirmation of drogue chutes. 2 drogues.
It's a view from inside the parachute bucket.
Dragon, nominal descent rate and recovery team reports a visual on 2 healthy drogues.
SpaceX Dragon copies. That's good news.
Should see drogue chute jettison here momentarily. We'll see those 2 chutes that you see be released from the capsule, just like so, and release the 4 parachutes, now deploying.
At this point in time, Dragon has saved all of its propulsion systems and is now has already terminated that nitrox suit and cabin purges. Those were helping to keep the crew cool during the reentry. Looks like we have 4 very beautiful and healthy main parachutes.
Dragon, we see a nominal descent rate on 4 healthy mains.
SpaceX Dragon copies, and SpaceX Dragon coming up on 1,000.
So there's that confirmation.
Copy, 1,000 meters.
Confirmation of those 4 healthy chute deployments. Now standing by for splashdown. At the point of splashdown, the capsule will be going about 15 or 16 miles per hour. Continuing to decelerate from a rate of from a speed of about 120 miles per hour.
800.
So we will now begin.
Copy, 800.
To hear Commander Steve Bowen call out the altitude as they approach the water surface.
That is again in meters.
Landing in water is simpler and provides more margin against unlikely parachute issues. We had to learn how to make Dragon waterproof, but once you do that, it's very much a rinse, review, reuse type process.
600.
Copy 600.
600 meters, and the descent rate is as predicted, meaning we're targeting that splashdown time in about a minute.
Live view of Dragon Endeavour with the Crew-6 team members on board, being held up by 4 beautiful main parachutes.
Dragon, we see 400.
We're now about 400 meters above the ocean surface.
SpaceX Dragon 200 braced for splashdown.
Copy, braced for splashdown.
Again, the seats have been rotated in a position to take the loads of re-entry and parachute deployment as well as splashdown. The crew is braced. We are inside 100 meters.
Dragon Endeavour continuing its slow descent. There we can see splashdown on screen. Those parachutes are then cut and released. Dragon Endeavour has now returned home. NASA astronauts Steve Bowen, Woody Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev.
SpaceX Dragon splashdown. We are in water rough riding.
Copy, splashdown, and we see main chutes cut.
After a 17-hour return journey from space, Crew-6 is home.
So the teams have been ready and waiting about 3 nautical miles away, so it's going to take them about 30 minutes to make their way to Steve, Woody, Sultan, and Andrey inside the Dragon. You can see the recovery forces in some of the views that you're seeing. Of course, these views being provided by the recovery vessels. You saw there was a helo deployed, providing some visuals and lighting of the Dragon capsule.
Stable 1.
Copy, stable 1. Dragon Endeavour, on behalf of NASA and SpaceX, welcome back home. Thank you for flying SpaceX.
Thanks, SpaceX Endeavour. We greatly appreciate all the support from all the initial training through the launch, throughout the mission, keeping us abreast of all the status of the vehicle, and all the support all the way down. This has been incredible. Greatly appreciate it, and look forward to working with you all again.
Copy all, and you've got a room full of happy people here. We've got some systems to verify safe before we give the boats a go to approach. I'll be back with you on that topic in a minute.
SpaceX Dragon copies, we'll just enjoy the wallowing here. It might be soothing, we may all be napping soon.
So there we just heard SpaceX Core just indicating to the crew that we're going to do some checks here. Here from Mission Control Hawthorne, we're going to do some system checks to make sure that everything is safe as necessary on the Dragon Endeavour capsule. They will then give the go for safe approach to the teams there that you see on your screen in the fast boats. One of those boats will focus on recovering the parachutes from the water. The other will begin inspections, a sniff test for those onboard propellants, nitrogen tetroxide and monomethylhydrazine. They are toxic if if someone were to breathe them. So we definitely want to ensure the safety of the entire recovery team as well as the crew. So one of the teams in the fast boats will perform a sniff test using devices while wearing personal protective equipment to ensure that none of those propellants have leaked out and that there's no vapors lingering from, just many minutes ago when those thrusters were actually firing.